Chapter 6 is in regards to deviance and social control. When we're looking at deviance, what is deviance? What is it? What's the cause of it? Why do we do it? When we're looking at deviance, it's basically the violations of norms or rules or expectations. We know we have expectations we're supposed to follow. We know there's certain rules that we have to follow. We have our neutral term type aspects. We could be as, deviance can be as simple as, a minor driving over the speed limit, and it could be as serious as a murder. So depending on what type of deviance we're talking about, there could be, the aspects of different culture of deviance. There's culture diversity when it comes to deviance and that type of aspects. Deviance is relative. You could end up having, some people end up with a stigma that actually ends up causing deviance towards them into personally. I was going to say independently, but it's one of those situations to where deviant, a person does not even have to do anything. Like I said, it could be a stigma. It could be having um, characteristics that discredit certain people. So it's, violations of those appearances. So therefore, people look at that as, something that's wrong, so they stigmate them, and therefore deviance behavior occurs towards them. So in other words, the normal behavior that we are supposed to have interacting with one another, it does occur. So there's that negative aspects. When we're looking at the deviance of relative, this is a major point that was made by the symbolic interactionism. This was a disturbance when it came down to behaviors being represented normal in everyday life. And how do we handle this? Like I said, that this is where we were looking at the relativity aspects. We're looking at the aspects of culturally wise. Every culture has our different respects and boundaries and that type of aspects. So when we're looking at this, what is deviance? In Kenya, um, the Pokata people place high emphasis on sexual pleasures. And they expect that both a husband and a wife will reach orgasm. If a husband does not satisfy his wife, he is in trouble. He will be punished by his wife and her friends. This is something that is considered a cultural diversity aspects around the world. And they look at it as the fact that because they weren't able, or the husband was not able to bring the pleasure to the wife, so therefore he has performed basically a deviant act. In other words, it's not a written law, but it's the part of their norms of their culture in regards to making sure that both parties are getting, an orgasm, and that both parties are pleasured, to make sure that they, are able to reach that basically climate. Excuse me. So the aspects of this when we're looking at it, because of the deviant behavior of the husband not being able to provide the needs of the wife, her friends are able to beat him, they're able to urinate on him, they're able to defecate on him, whatever the case may be, to bring that humiliation back down to him. So that's all deviant behavior, but that's culture diversity. Kind of gives you the differences in between culture type aspects. When we're looking at crime, it's basically a written violation of norms, right? Into laws. It's breaking those laws. Very simple, very basic, straightforward. When we're looking at the aspects of like social order, social control, the negative sanctions, the positive sanctions. When we're looking at this, we're looking at social order. What is social order? It's basically a customary social arrangement is brought about the norms. It's basically one of those situations to where your group is customary social arrangements. Our lives are based on the arrangements in which is why deviance is often perceived as threatening. It undermines predictability. It's the foundation of basically social life. That is social order. Once again, it is a group social order or customary social arrangements is brought about norms. So how do we get our groups to act in the normal aspects that we're supposed to, right? When we're looking at social control are just the formal and informal meanings of enforcing its norms. So we have our informal, we have our primary groups, we have our secondary groups, right? So we have our social control within those groups. You know, if they're a primary group, we have a lot of social control. We have that really formal, we know our rules, we know our boundaries. If we're more in a secondary group, they're really informal type aspects, we're going to test our boundaries as far as we could go. So we're going to break those norms. We're going to have some deviance behaviors. We've had a discussion in regards to negative and positive. When we're talking about negative sanction, this is a disapproval for breaking the norms, ranging from a mild, it could be to severe, it could be prison, it could be, you know, it's a negative type aspects. You know, in this type of aspects, if we are looking at someone going down and speeding down the freeway or something like that and gets pulled over and now has to pay a $500 speeding ticket, that is a negative sanction. That is something that is you broke the law, or you were deviant, you broke the norms, so therefore you're being like it's almost a punishment. Are you going to speed again? Yeah, eventually you will, but it won't be right away. It's just one of those situations that you kind of learn the lesson at the time, but eventually you fall back into old habits. A positive sanction is the approval of the following the norms, ranging from a smile to a good grade in class to material rewards such as a prize, whatever that may be. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing, right? So when you're looking at the aspects, kind of wanted to go back in regards to social control. If you guys are following along with the study guide, make sure you guys do get this when it comes to social control, because deviance undermines predictability. A system of social control we develop is enforced to enforce the norms. Remember, it's to keep that balance in between the formal and informal social control. So like I said, positive sanction, something good, prize, smile, high fives, whatever it might be. If you go and do this huge talk at a big, you know, say a TED talk, and you give this big speech and you do this big spill and you did the best that you could, and you know at the end no one claps. That might give you more of a negative sanction, right? But if everybody comes up to you and congratulates you, they're smiling, telling you how great of a job you're doing awesome, they praise you, you're being praised by everybody, that is a positive sanction, right? So kind of know the difference. Positive is a good thing, negative is a bad thing, straightforward. Nothing has changed in regards to that. It's all kind of copacetic in regards to the previous chapters in regards to the positive and negative aspects. When we're looking at the competitive explanation of deviance, from a biological or bisocial aspects, they assume genetic predispositions are the inborn tendencies that are committed to the deviant acts people commit. It's our inherited prepositions modified and stimulated by our environment, but underneath the bisocial aspects, they're saying it's within our genetic predisposition. Okay. When we're looking at the striving of it, we want to know why do people behave the way they do? Why do people, you know, act a certain way? Why do people do the certain acts that they do? When we're looking at serial murders, or when we're looking at those types of aspects, why do they do what they do? Is it biological? Is it psychological? Is it sociological? Which one is it? So when we're trying to explain the definitions of deviance, we have to look at it from all aspects. From, like I said, from a bisocial, they look at it from a genetic predisposition. From a psychological, they examine personality disorders that might cause deviance. Those personality orders could be as simple as, you know, depression. It could be bipolar. It could be schizophrenic. It could be those types of personality disorders are going to, you know, might cause those deviant behaviors as well, depending on what's going on. Sociological, they look at the social influences that recruit people to break the norms, right? They look at people to, you know, understand the reason why, how much of a social aspects, how much of a recruiting aspects as a society or the, you know, your social groups kind of have on you within the aspects. So when we're looking at from a sociological, we're looking at the answers within individuals, such as a possible genetic predisposition to the deviance. When we're looking at from a psychologists look at the possible of the personality disorders. Okay. Kind of know the two in between that. The reason why I'm repeating it, because it's something that's going to be important. You're going to need to know for the exam. When we're looking at symbolic interaction perspective, right? We have this differential association theory. It was Edward Sutherland that used this term, and he used this term to basically to indicate that people who associate with some groups, learn an excessive of definition of deviance, increasing the likelihood that they will become deviant. This is that differential association theory. So they look at the families, they look at friends, they look at neighborhoods, they look at subcultures. How are these, associations with all these different people? How can we learn this excessive definitions of deviance, and how is it going to more likely increase someone to become more deviant? So that's how Sutherland kind of looked at it. So he looked from the family side point. They're forming your ideals towards life. They want you to observe, the big differences, whether people learn deviance or conformity type aspects from a family aspects. From friends and neighborhoods and some cultures, these are more that, most people don't know the term differential association type aspects, but, they want to know how they work. So most parents want to move away from the bad. They want more of the good involved in that type of aspects in the neighborhoods, but sometimes it doesn't matter what neighborhood you're in, it's going to be there. So that becomes more of an environmental learn type aspects of deviance. So it's one of those aspects to where, if you want to think of families are more of that moral set boundaries. Your friends in your neighborhoods and your subcultures that you kind of associate with are going to be more of that differential, because those are going to give you those excess definitions, those above and beyond definitions that what your family don't tell you. When we're looking at the cyber age type aspects, we have cyberbullying going on. If you really want to think about it, cyberbullying, yes, is deviance. It's something that is a learned behavior. It's something that is done. It's not a friend. You can look at it as probably a subculture, because they're kind of all their own, own little group. But at the same time, it is a deviant behavior. And it's easier to do versus doing it face to face. So that's the other aspects of it too. And are we prison or are we free? So when we look at this, we looked at this in, mentioned in chapter 3. It's an issue that comes up over and over again in sociology. Are we prisoners of sociology? Are we free of sociology? Are we able to kind of do what we want to do? If you really want to think about it, it kind of goes two different ways. We could look at it saying, yeah, we're free. We have our freedom of speech. We have our freedom to do this. However, we have our laws to keep us within our boundaries. But when we break those laws, when we break those norms, then we're considered deviant. So then are we really free to kind of do whatever we want to do? Where I wouldn't say we're completely free to be, free from doing anything we want, but at the same time, we're not prisoners either. So we have these different type of aspects to kind of look at it. When we're looking at control theory is one of those aspects. It's an ideal that we have two control systems within us. We have our inner controls and we have our outer controls. They work against our tendencies to be deviant, more or less. So these are the ones that kind of control our inner thoughts, our inner feelings. Like, I always say you have that one angel on one side and the devil on the other saying, "Don't do it, do it, don't do it, do it." Right? Your inner two, you have your inner and your outer controls. Kind of look at it as control theory that way. Those are your ones that you want to control your tendencies. Like, you're not supposed to do something, but yet you have that other outer control that just kind of goes, oh, I got to do this. Like, I just want to, it doesn't matter what's going to go on. I know I might get in trouble, but I'm going to risk it anyways. So the inner and outer, those are our control theories. During that control theory too, if something does happen and something does occur, if we happen to go through that, jury prison type aspects, you go through that degradation ceremony all over again, because now what happens is that you get placed in front of somebody that's going to probably either do one or two things. Either you're going to get cleared of your crimes that you've done, or you're going to get committed for the crimes that you've done. If you get committed for the crimes that you've done, you're going to get basically stricken of your identity. That's that degradation ceremony all over again. However, when we're looking at from a symbolic in the action of a perspective, if I tell you, do you understand how the definitions of deviance that mafia members use to underline their behaviors? If you say mafia, you automatically know, what they're all about. We all know that they're all about deviance. If I mention cartel, same thing. It's one of those situations. They have their own beat of a drum to where they kind of beat to. They make their own rules. They make their own laws. They don't abide by the normal laws within the state or the county or whatever they're in. So showing here, this is John Gotti, when he was the head of New York's Gambino Mafia. Basically, he was convicted of murder. He actually died in prison, but he was part of the mafia type aspects, but like I said, if you say mafia, automatically all the deviant in your head comes to mind in regards to what they do. If I say cartel, oh my gosh, if you guys don't know who cartels are, it's a good thing. They're mafia. It's one of those situations, but they commit deviance all the time. They're not always caught for their deviance either. So like I said, control theory, deviance takes many forms. One of the most predominant is the action of police. Police have that control theory too, that inner and outer. Excuse me. They have that inner and out of control too. Sometimes their out of control takes precedence over that inner control. So that kind of goes back to this social control type aspects when we're looking at the underlining of everything. This is all part of symbolic. When we're looking at the social control and we're looking at control theory, we're looking at the symbolic interaction, how would social control theory apply in such of a situation here? You could take these two girls sitting on top of these guys' shoulders. Is this something that they would normally do, or is this more environmental type of aspects that's making them behave the way they are? Or is it one of those situations to where their outer control senses are like, I'm able to kind of let my hair down, be free, no one's going to know what I'm going to do, versus having that inner control to balance it to where they're not too far out of control, right? This is that social control where that kind of comes in. So when it comes to control theory, we have two systems that work against our tendencies to deviance. When we're looking at like labeling theory is basically states that the labels people are given to affect their own and others' perception of them. Thus channeling their behavior into either deviant or conformity. So here, if you have, this natural techniques to protect yourself, we always have these walls up to kind of protect ourselves. We don't want to be hurt. We don't want to, let our guard down too quick, too fast. So we tend to naturalize techniques of naturalization. It's the way we think. It's the way how we rationalize that people deflect or neutralize society norms. So this is more like that labeling theory. It's how we neutralize the aspects of things, right? And then you have them, while most people resist labels of deviance, right? Some embrace them. If you have this label of being deviant all the time, oh, he's going to break the rules. Oh, this is how he acts. Oh, this is the person that, they just start embracing it. So they'll start changing the way they look. They'll start getting that symbolic side of things. They will do things to make sure their labels match their identity. So you can kind of see in this photo illustrates the embracing of the deviance. When you're looking at the fact, when you look at your textbook, notice there's two pictures here. Believe it or not, it's one of those things that while most people resist labelings of deviance, some embrace them. It's one of those things. These photos illustrate the embracing of deviance. This guy's got 666 tattooed on his forehead. He's got the nose piercing. He's got the tattoo across the face, on the neck. He's got the implants in his forehead. The other picture has, a little bit more. They got the stretching of the ears, the tattooing of coloring, and, really detailed coloring on the facials, the embedding in the forehead as well. different type of tattoos. They have tattoos going down the middle of the arch of their nose, and the nose piercing, the septum piercings. Their teeth are even jagged. But that's that taking of that labeling and taking it to the extreme. But it's one of those situations where if you're going to be labeled as that way, those typical stereotypic, positive or negative ways, people tend to react in those type of actions. They'll either take it to the extreme, they'll use the most powerful way to kind of label themselves that way, and that's just the way how it goes. When you look at this photo here, you're going to say what types of stereotypes come to your mind when you look at this photo. This photo for me, I can't take it serious no matter how many times I've sit here and looked at it, no matter how many times I rationalize it and try to say what type of stereotypes come up, and the only one that comes up for me is wannabes, except for one gentleman. There's only one gentleman that actually looks really legit that could probably, kind of fit this profile, and that would be this one down here. But otherwise than that, when we're looking at this, the rest of them don't fit that typical profile, that typical stereotype label, right? So when we're looking at it in general, you can kind of say, yeah, they're gangsters, but in my eyes, like I said, there's only one, which is him, that stands out to me that says, you know what, yeah, he is a gangster, he fits the profile. The rest of them, they're just wanting to be like him. They're wannabes. Um, you know, can they do harm? Can they do damage? Absolutely. But that's not what we're doing here. Right now, we're trying to show the symbolic interaction of labeling and stereotyping in regards to certain types of deviance. So like I mentioned, degradation ceremony. If, like I said, if someone is called to account for a group, the witnesses denounce that person, the offender is pronounced guilty, that offender is now stripping of his identity and being that group member. He is pronounced guilty, he's going to prison, he no longer has his normal identity that he has. He's basically going through a degradation ceremony, right? Being stripping of his identity. When we're looking at from the functionalist perspective, how is deviant a function for society, right? When we're looking at why is deviance a function for society, right? In order for deviance, it's basically encourages social unity, right? Keyword there, encourages. It clarifies our moral boundaries, it affirms our norms, in other words, it affirms our rules. It encourages social unity, us to work all together. It promotes that social change. If we don't have this unity type aspects, then are we really going to have deviance, right? It's just one of those things. But we have to have that all encouraging type aspects. When we're looking at it from a functionalist perspective, from a string theory, excuse me, how mainstream values produce deviance, right? This was a sociologist, Robert Merton, developed strain theory. It was basically an alignment of opportunity structures of social class and crime, street crime versus white collar crime. It's one of those situations to where strain theory can kind of build in regards to our society large numbers of people to desire a cultural goals such as success, from some of the approved means of reaching the goal. It's just one of those aspects. It's like, how do we, on a functional side, how do we get past this strain theory type aspects, right? We have our cultural goals, we have our institutional means, we have all the necessary things. But when we're talking about deviance and the values that produce deviance, how does that stop us from that opportunity of structures, right? How do we make sure we don't have this flaw that kind of goes across, right? So once again, sociologist Robert Merton is the one who developed strain theory. Or how people match their goals to their means, right? Do they feel the strain that leads to anonymity? Who remembers what anonymity is? It's that feeling, that syncness, that uniqueness, the bonding in between. If you guys need the definition again, look at the back of the book for the actual definition, or go back into, I want to say it was in chapter I want to say it's in chapter 3 for the actual definition. But for those of you who may not have a textbook, I'm letting you know it's a crimes term for a condition of society in which people become detached from the usual norms that guide their behavior, right? How or do they feel the strain that leads to anonymity? So how do they do this? First one is no, they don't feel that strain at all. They conform, no problems, their culture goals they accept, and the institutional means they accept. In other words, they're going to just follow along. They're not going to break any rules. They're not going to break any laws. They're going to live with no deviance in their life, right? Functionalist perspective. Deviant paths. If you feel strain, yes, okay, well, you could have 4 different strains that you could feel, 4 deviant paths, right? You could either, one, look at innovation, which is accept your culture goals and you're going to reject all institutionalized means. Or 2, you're going to be ritualism, which you're going to reject cultural goals and you're going to accept institutional means. Number 3 is retreatism, where you're going to reject both. And then the 4th one is rebellion. You're going to reject both, but you're going to replace it with something. So you're going to replace whatever that strain may be to fit what you might work with. Looking at this picture here, this is a white collar crime, can be deadly, and yet the criminals go unpunished. A lot of white collar crimes, bank lawsuits, stuff like that, a lot of them get settled outside of court type issues. They just do the settlement, aspects, and that's pretty much it. But when we're looking at the white collar crimes here, GM cars were faulty for the ignition switches. They known about the problem. It killed over 124 people. In this picture here, this father's holding a picture of her daughter who was actually driving one of those GM cars that had the faulty ignition and who died. In this case, the settlement doesn't bring back the human being, right? But at the same time, the only thing GM had to do was just pay out a fee. There was nothing else done. So that's what the white collar crime, can mean. It goes unpunished. It kind of just gets a slap on the hand saying, okay, here you have to pay these fees, to these families who lost lives. But at the same time, it really doesn't justify in regards to why it's happening. If they go unpunished, is it going to continue to happen? It may not be the same thing that will happen, but something else might happen. So it's kind of one of those things. It's that perpetual situations in some companies, like B of A and Wells Fargo and, Chase and all of them, they do have laws that have come up, a lot of them in mortgage banking side. But at the same time, it's like, okay, they just paid a fee outside of the courts, so they never really got to deal with their punishment aspects. When we're looking at the alignment of opportunity of structure, this refers to the opportunities for crime that have woven into the textures of life, right? So looking at this aspects of GM cars, you could kind of look at it as a alignment opportunity of structures. We know sometimes our cars might not be 100% perfect, so it's those opportunities for crime to occur that are just basically woven into the tech life. We know it could occur. We know it's going to go unpunished type aspects, but how do we make sure this doesn't go too far and too beyond the means? GM cars, faulty ignition switches was just one aspect. Firestone had the issues with their tires at one point in time. It occurs all the time, right? So the alignment opportunity, it's the is for crime that are woven within the textures of life. So how safe is our state? Violent crimes within the U.S. And when they're talking about violent crimes, they're talking about murders, rapes, robbery, aggravated assaults. They're looking at, this is in 2017. So this is, a few years ago. But if you notice, the most safest states was Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Virginia, and Wyoming. All 4 of those states, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Virginia. All 5 of those states, there's one thing that's common within all 5 of those states, and that is they all have the right to carry. So no one's going to mess around with somebody that's going to be carrying a gun, because they could take care of it all on their own. However, if you look at Nevada, Alaska, New Mexico, these are considered the most dangerous states. I would ask you guys why. Think about why. Why would Nevada be the most dangerous state? Why would Alaska be the most dangerous state? Who lives in Alaska, right? Tennessee, New Mexico. Why are these the most violent crime? We're talking about murder, rapes, robbery, aggravated assaults. Why are these the most dangerous states? What is there to cause that type of aspects, right? Nevada, think about it. What's there? You have the casinos. So you have the not so much of the murder, but you have the rape, the robbery, and the aggravated assaults consistently, in Vegas type aspects kind of happening. When you're looking at Alaska, it could be aggravated assault, it could be robbery, it could be murder, depending on how, what's going on, times of seasons, and that type of aspects. So there's different aspects. California is considered the most, well, not as high, but they're not average. They're close to average, but we're not average for being a dangerous state. But I'm going to ask you guys this: when it comes for the statistics, and we're looking at it, where do they get their information from? How much of this is actually true and accurate? How much of it did not get reported? You can kind of look at it that way. When you're looking at murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, we've already known not all rapes get reported. That's something that's high on the list. When it talks about robbery, on a situation like this, does every person who commits robbery get charged of it? No. Aggravated assault, same thing. It really depends on the discretion of the officer, which we know it's something that they deal with. But it's also part of our criminal justice system too, in regards to how it gets labeled. So when we're looking at it from a functional perspective, they wanted to look at in regards to the types of crimes women commit, and what's changed from 92 to 2014. And when they looked at for all of those were arrested, what percentages were women? And when they looked at the burglary aspects from 92 to 14, there was a 93% increase. It's a huge increase. When you're looking at car theft, same thing. Arson's still kind of high. The one that kind of dropped is fraud. Fraud dropped down to 7%. Forgery, counterfeit, it only had an increase of 5%. Nowadays, it's harder to do these because of all the checks and balances that are in place. These are always going to be around, so they're always going to fluctuate. As in for the rest of it, but if you see these are the highest ones, I'll do it this way. These are the high ones that have the highest percentages in regards to the increase. But when you look at the whole picture, just because there's a gender issue here, are showing this high increase due to in gender, my thing is that do they get the same sentences as a man would? So kind of think of it that way. Yeah, women are committing the crimes, but at the same time, they don't get the judicial system type aspects of the same sentencing as what a man would. So when we're looking at class, we're looking at crimes, and we're looking at criminal justice conflict perspective aspects. When we look at this, our criminal justice system is basically our police, our courts, our prisons. They deal with people who are accused of having committed some type of a crime, right? But when we're looking at the conflict perspective of class, in early capitalism, children worked alongside adults. At that time, just as today, most street crimes came from the marginal working class, right? As did these boys who worked in the glasswork companies in Indiana, in 1908. Think about it, 1908, it has been 100 years since then. But at the same time, take those times, take those, criterias, those type of living arrangements, and put them in today's terms. Take your normal manufacturing warehouse job type aspects and say that you're working there, and put a 10-year-old next to you doing the exact same job, getting the exact same pay. What is your mindset that's going to change, right? When we're looking at the conflict perspective to deviance, is that going to cause more behaviors of people to commit crimes? Because now you have basically a 10-year-old that's capable of doing the exact same job you're doing, right? It's going to cause that reaction, not so much of a, you know, be proactive, is going to cause a reaction type aspects. When we're looking at the how much is enough, the explosions and numbers of U.S. prisoners, we have this huge peak in 2009 that we had 1.6 million prisoners that were incarcerated during this time. The line graph there, here's prediction. Like I said, this is from 2017, 2015. 2015 in regards to the prisoners that were within the systems. They're showing a drop off in 2020. My question is, do you think this is true and accurate when we're looking at the numbers? Do we still have a lot of prisoners that are incarcerated? We have the numbers are, they're consistently adjusting. We have, prisoners that are getting out, prisoners that are going in, and kind of that rotating circle that keeps going around and around and around as well. But at the same time, we have these ones that are those repeated offender type aspects, right? That your street crime type aspects. They go in, they do their time, they get out, they go back into the same living arrangements that they were in. The chances are that there's like a 20% chance that they're going to commit the same crime and go back to jail. So when we're looking at this, how do we make this better? How do we make our criminal justice system better to where there's a even across the board sentencing across for everybody versus this, whether if it's based off of stereotypic, judging somebody for the way they look, like they're dressed a certain way, so therefore, they automatically did the crime, or they had tattoos or whatever it might be, based off of color, whether if they're non-whites versus whites, capitalists versus, poverty type aspects. How do we justify it? Why do we have so many prisoners in prison, basically, right? There was a law that was in place at one point in time. We're getting to that, right? When we looked at street crime in prisons, what's the difference in between the two, right? When we're looking at street crimes, there's a 5% of the world's population, about 25, let me start that over. The United States has about 5% of the world's population, but about 25% of the world's prisoners. 1 out of 35 adults, 7 million Americans, are on probation, basically, or on parole, or in jail or in prison, if you really want to slice down those numbers, right? Why do we have so much in regards to this, right? When we're looking at this and we're comparing the prisons and the inmates and the population type, right? The characteristics, the percent of prisoners with those characteristics, and the percent of U.S. population age of 18 and over with those same characteristics. And some of them, you can see that the characteristics of those prisoners are higher than the actual U.S. population. It also breaks it down between race and ethnicity. And it breaks it down in between males and females and marital status, whether if they've never been married, or divorced. So how do we stop this vicious type circle, right? And then if we look at the education, when we're looking at this, a good indicator that the ones that are on death penalty applies to lower class citizens is that one half of all the prisoners on death row have not finished high school. That is key. One half. Why haven't they finished high school? If these prisons are offering school They're offering incentives. They're offering these individuals to work. There's a lot of different things that prisons are offering them, but these are the individuals that are on death row. What makes a difference if they're on death row or not? Why can't they still get those education type aspects, right? What are they going to do? In early, what year was it? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I want to say it was in 1993, but back in the 1980s and back to 90s, there was an alarming amount of individuals that had got put into prison because of this lovely three-strike law, right? Three-strike law basically ended up, it didn't matter if it was a violent or a non-violent crime that you committed. In this picture that it's showing you, little girl's 11 years old, middle little boy's 8, youngest one is 6, holds a picture of their father, um, who is in prison for 25 years for basically theft, right? Three-strike law, it happened it basically the public favored for the in 1983 of a kidnap and a rape and a murder of a 12-year-old little girl, basically by Richard Allen Davis, who was a repeated offender on parole at the time. Now, in a situation like that, I would say yes, absolutely. You know, he is a repeated offender. He should have never been out on parole in the first place. But at the same time, you know, that should have been somebody that was put into, you know, a facility for prison for life, not an individual for theft. Your book gives you several examples. There was a 64-year-old man who stole this pack of cigarettes, was sentenced to 25 because it was his third sentence. Um, there's another one, according to a California man who passed a bad check for $94. Now, I could sit here and ask the whole class in regards to who has ran their debit card knowing they didn't have the money. You know, back in 93, if you did that and you did it 3 times, or if you had 2 other nonviolent crimes or whatever the case might have been, if that was your third offense, you went to jail. That's just how it worked. You know, that individual was sentenced to 25 years to life. Florida man who stored cocaine in his girlfriend's attic was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but his 27-year-old girlfriend, mother of 3 children, who was sentenced to prison life, the judge said the sentence was unjust, but since it was her third felony convicted, he had no choice but to convict her and put her in basically life in prison. She's a mom of 3 kids, and you know, was it her cocaine? No, it was the actual boyfriend's, but because guilty by association and it was her third offense, she went to jail. um the last one kind of, you know, it kind of a little disturbing, but if you think about it, in New York City, a man who was about to be sentenced for selling, you know, crack cocaine, basically said to the judge, "I'm only 19, this is terrible." And then he hurled himself out of the courtroom window, basically plunging to his death 16 stories below. You know, 19 years old, basically saying, "I'm not going to serve my life in prison because of selling crack cocaine." However, is it against the law? Absolutely. But because it was basically his third offense, he was going to go to jail for the rest of his life for it. So when you're looking at the three-strike law, it actually ended up convicting nonviolent offenders. So they actually terminated the three-strike law, gone away with it. They stopped, you know, putting people into that type, you know, labeling, because it was a third offense. So therefore, they felt that, you know, they needed to go away. I want to say it was in 2000. I want to say 14 is when it went away. How fast did they return? So this is the reconvictivism of the U.S. prisoners, and this shows arrest and back to prison. There is a 20% gap here that prisoners will end up going back, and it's usually within, you know, a short time frame. It's usually within 5 years, and it's usually for, you know, rearresting rates for those who have been convicted of, whether if it's car theft, burglary, illegal weapons fraud, illegal drugs, robbery, rape, driving drunk, or murder. And when you're looking at death penalty, this is basically capital punishment. It's considered the death penalty. These are the most extreme cases, in states that take. We do have states that do not have the death penalty. Those are the ones that are in purple. The ones that are blue have death penalty but have not executed anyone. The ones that are in like the orangish color do have the capital punishment, that basically death penalty, and they list out the numbers. Texas is the number 1 for doing the death penalty. Oklahoma's number 2. Virginia's number. And a lot of California's ones that are on death penalty or death row, they end up actually getting shipped over to Texas. So I would believe that's the reason why Texas numbers are so high. But these are executions also since 1997, or excuse me, 1977. So you're talking over 40 plus years of dealing with executions. And then when we're looking at the aspects of usually who ends up on death row, those are the ones that are usually like the serial murders type aspects. And a serial murder is basically defined as killing of several victims in 3, keyword there, 3 or more separate events, right? Your perfect example that they gave you in your textbook is Ted Bundy. Bundy was considered a serial murder. He's the one that actually he did several events, killing several victims at one point in time. And then when you're looking at in between class, gender, race, and ethnicity, who gets executed, you do have some gender bias in regards to this. If you can see, there's very little women who are actually on death row and who actually has been executed, basically. And then men are actually a lot higher in that aspects of thinking. But reactions to deviance. What are our reactions to deviance? Why do we act certain ways? Why do we tend to put up our walls? Why do we tend to label, stereotype, all of those aspects? Why do we act in certain ways towards deviant individuals? Um, the trouble with the official statistics type aspects is that, we do have police discretion that has to go on. Police discretion is basically the decision to arrest someone or even to ignore a matter. It's a routine part of police work every day, day in, day out. But they also have to take in this aspects of medicalization of deviance and the mental illness and all of that aspects as well. So how do they determine? Part of their police discretion is to know if it is a mental illness. Did the person actually mean to commit that crime? Are they in the right state of mind? If they are in the right state of mind, usually what ends up happening is when they end up going to, in front of a judge, they say that they weren't in the right state of mind. And then they have to go through all the psychiatric treatments in regards to making sure that they are in the right state of mind. But then they have to go at that time and event and stuff like that. So when it comes to mental illness and drug and alcohol addictions are common among homeless, right? This in Miami, Florida. It could have been taken anywhere in large cities in the United States. You could take the high desert for example. And this is something that we see very common all the time. People holding signs saying hungry and homeless. It's an aspect. It's part of life. It's part of what we see in our natural society. But when we're looking at the medicalization of deviance, what medical matters and synthesis of symptoms of some underlying illnesses that need to be treated by a physician, right? When you're looking at the mental illness, they need to be looked at by a physician. So there needs to be medical prescriptions and all that type of aspects when you're looking at the mental illness. And when you're talking about homeless, not all of them get the medical needs they need. A lot of them go without all those medical needs. So there's a big gap there for, the need a more humane approach in regards to mentally ill. People need to understand a little bit more in regards to how to understand how to deal, how to cope, how to, work with them within a society and not just label them a certain way and label them as, oh, they're deviant or they're alcoholics or they're, drug abusers or, there could be other underlying layer there that, yeah, they might be homeless and maybe they're not getting the actual help that they need from a physician to make sure. So, maybe there's that medical need to have those medications from a physician, but yet they can't get there because of a homeless issue, and all the what ifs kind of tack onto. So we really don't know, but we have to make sure that we're doing this to deviants in the proper humane approach, right? And not just labeling them for just the way how someone looks like, or stigmate them because of the way they look like. If you guys have any questions on chapter 6, shoot me an email. I'm more than willing to help you out.